trying to figure this out. Ah! Woo!
Wait, I'm like, this chair is no bueno. Get rid of this chair. I don't like that chair. And then move my chair. I did turn the air down. Listen.
Thank you.
Okay. Are we on?
Yes, we are.
So for those of you who are on Zoom, I sent out the materials just a few minutes ago, so you should have those. Okay, so David, Martin, the people that are here, anybody on Zoom, what is it that when you're doing a transaction,
They can hear you.
oh, they can?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. What is it that you guys find that gets you messed up or that makes it confusing? Because it seems like everybody gets so confused with the ORR.
Yes, the ORR is definitely confusing.
I think what's tricky is other offices don't know how to use it also. So they're asking for signatures on all the pages. They're asking for different things that we've been told we don't need to do.
He seems to be able to get on the same page is the biggest problem.
Nobody seems to, okay. So initially, let's say that you get inspections done and you have a buyer and they say, oh, I'm good with all the inspections. I'm not gonna ask for any repairs. What do you do at that point? Well, technically, you don't have to do anything, right? You just move on. And the thing that people don't understand or forget about a contract is that you don't always have to have a document to state we're good with this, we're good with that. Okay, so for example, when you have a survey and you don't object to a survey, do you do an addendum that says we're okay with the survey, right? So what's the difference? Inspections.
Good question.
Right? But people want some sort of
Peace of mind.
finality, right? Like, we're good.
Sure.
So that was the inspection document that I created for you guys, that is in Simply Back Agent. And I did go through Simply Back Agent, everybody, and it should be in pretty good shape, hopefully. We're not missing anything in there. But, so I created a document that basically just says they're not asking for any repairs. However, everything else in the contract, you know, the contingencies in the contract, they're not waiving those contingencies, right? So you can use that document if you choose to. You don't have to. It's just people kept asking for it, and we don't have one of those in the NMAR library. Now, what happens when the buyer wants to ask for repairs? You send them the objection. Now, the objection, can you use the objection for anything that you're objecting to?
Yes.
Yes. So whether it's a survey or a appraisal or whatever contingency is in the contract, insurance, all the different contingencies that we have. Remember, you guys, I think we complicate things in the way we do it here. In the majority of the states, in their contract, they have a due diligence period. Okay, and the due diligence period is where all contingencies are in one date, one time frame. Okay, so basically it's one date that says you have this much time to do your due diligence. Now we confuse it and we break every contingency up in our contract, right? So I think that makes it more confusing for people because it's like, okay, we got this contingency, right? So it is what it is. It's the way ours is written, so whatever. But point being that the objection resolution and waiver notice, oh shoot, I sent you guys the wrong document.
Did I just get all that?
Yep, I sure did.
But I did a good job.
You did.
After I screwed up.
I'm not too worried about it because we don't necessarily need it. I sent you guys the old objection and resolution. I need to get rid of that. So that objection and resolution form that you have is out the door. If you guys choose to pull it up, if you want the, objection, it is form 5141. That's the objection, form. Now, when you're using the objection form, is that a part of the contract? No. The whole reason behind the new way of doing the ORR is that the objection and the responses do not become part of the contract.
Therefore, they don't go to the mortgage company.
Therefore, they don't go to the mortgage company. And the idea was that when we don't send information to the mortgage company, when we don't send information to the mortgage company, that's mortgage fraud. Because it specifically states withholding information to the mortgage company, which could result in a loan getting denied or affect a loan, is mortgage fraud, right? So they decided, okay, well, we'll do this instead, and then it won't be mortgage fraud, okay? In my opinion, we're still withholding information. The difference is it's not part of the contract, right? So before, when we had the objection and resolution document, the whole document went, so they could see everything that they were going back and forth, so they could see every repair,
It
right?
looks like it's attached to.
And it was an addendum,
Yeah.
right? So every addendum is attached to the contract. So they said, okay, we need to make it so that the only thing that goes to the lender is the resolution, right? However, do we still know material facts that we're not sending to the lender? Yes, we do. Now, I don't agree with this. I feel that every seller should know everything about their property, so if it terminates, the next buyer gets that information. I feel that this has not eliminated mortgage fraud because we still have material facts that we know that we're not disclosing. But the powers that be do not agree with me, and so this is what they came up with. Now, the good news is that since these are state forms, if something were to go wrong with these forms, your E&O insurance is going to cover you. Not that you want to get in a situation like that, but there you go. Now, if, let's just say, for example, that you, as a seller or listing broker, get a objection and you end up not being able to resolve it, and you put the house back on the market, at that point, what should you do as a listing broker?
Disclose whatever you know.
Disclose the new information. There is an addendum to the adverse material facts form where you can add information that you didn't have before. You could also add it on the adverse material facts form if you want, or you could just use honestly an addendum that's just an addendum to the adverse material facts. I don't really care how you do it, just need to make sure it's disclosed. Now, sending an email, in my opinion, does not suffice, because if they don't respond back that they received it, how do you know they received it? And number two, if the list or the buyer's broker says received, how do you know it got to the buyer, right? So in my opinion, it needs to be on a form that the buyer acknowledges, and then they have that information. Okay.
Are you saying we should put this in the listing, as a part of a documents?
You mean in the MLS?
Yeah, an MLS is part of documents. Should we put, if we fill in an extra form saying what we know, and make it private or make it public, or what do we do?
Private. I mean, I would say always keep things private. I don't think that we need to,
So
give it
just send
out
it
to
in
the
when it
world.
goes under contract.
Yeah, just to make it available. Now, something that will save you guys every time if you get into a bind. So I'll give you an example of the one we have right now. Our broker Miranda, she had an adverse material facts form, and with that form, part of that form attached to it as one document, it was in the MLS. She received back the adverse material facts form signed off by the buyer, right? Now, the rest of the document wasn't signed off on, right? But it was all included. And so right then and there, you can see that that document was sent to the buyer. Now, if it's separate, I don't care about that either, right? However, the difference between having separate documents on the MLS is if you do say an addendum to the adverse material facts form and you put it on the MLS, that addendum needs to be signed off on. Or if you have additional disclosures, like say you have reports You know, anything that is disclosing something in the MLS, I definitely would say the buyer needs to at least initial that, so that you know that they got it. Now, the best practice would be to have it all as in one document, right? Now, you're still, it being in the MLS, that now falls on the buyer broker to disclose that information because it's in the MLS. So you're still protected in that sense, but it being one, like I love that Miranda had it all as one document, because even though she doesn't have all those pages initial, because it was all one document, to me, that suffices,
Yeah.
right? If she had put those reports separate and she didn't have those documents initialed, you know, you can always say, well, the buyer broker should have disclosed it, and you're still pretty protected, you know, you disclosed it, but it's tied up in a nice bow when it's all one document. Okay, so please make sure that if that happens and a contract terminates based on anything that comes out of the repair objections, that you make sure that that gets to the next buyer, okay? The number one issues I have with transactions is repairs. And the number one thing, not the number one, I would say one of the most heard things I get is that wasn't disclosed, that wasn't disclosed, that wasn't disclosed, right? And so it's like, if you have something to say, yes, it was. So I would say 95% of my lawsuits, it was disclosed, they just conveniently forget.
Didn't know. So
They
in
got
that scenario, I mean, I know what I would do, but I wouldn't.
Talk a little louder.
Let's say this happens, the deal falls apart because of an objection or something, you know, a material defect. It's terminated, you relist it, but your seller fixes the item. The way I understand it, tell me if I'm wrong, is now we do not have to disclose that anymore because it's been repaired. Is that correct?
That is correct, but you need to make sure if it's something along the lines of a leak,
Yeah.
like a roof leak,
Right.
or something that
That's exactly what's in my head.
the test of time
Yeah.
is going to have to show you to make sure it's repaired. Then
All right, so if it doesn't rain, since it's been
if
repaired.
it
you
hasn't
really don't
rained, then
know
you
if
really
it's
can't
actually
prove that it was fixed, right?
Okay.
Now, if it's just a black and white type of thing, different story, but here's a good example. Miranda's is a really good example of how good of a job she did. So the sellers had mold and they disclosed it, and they disclosed the reports. They disclosed the report that showed that it had been remediated and passed, okay? That was all part of that adverse material facts form. So even though the seller fixed it, they provided all that documentation. Now, why is that important to provide that documentation? What's one of the reasons? Multiple, but what's one of the important reasons? To give them their time to do due diligence if that's an issue to them.
Right.
So in that case,
So you have
right,
to recheck it.
you have that conversation with your buyer and you say, hey, Mr. Buyer, we've got a report here from a, you know, certified company or licensed company or whatever it is, showing that it was remediated. But if this is an issue to you, you need to get it tested,
Right.
right? In this case, they did not get it tested. And it turns out the leak had still been ongoing. So it turns out there's still mold, right? You couldn't tell, you couldn't see it, you couldn't smell it, right? But Miranda did all her due diligence to get all the information. So to answer your question, it's going to depend on the
That's
situation.
really what it is.
Exactly. If I have a leak under a sink that's very visible, I get it fixed, I'm probably not gonna be too worried about disclosing it, right? If I get a roof repaired or, you know, mold remediated, or if there was high radon, I mean, certain things that could be serious health issues, I'm probably going to disclose. Now, let me tell you what's happened with that one. Now the people are saying they didn't know any of this. One company had come out and give them an estimate. Another company came out and gave an estimate. They went with this company. Now they're saying that they like conveniently don't know about this one, but they're saying because this company didn't do the work, it wasn't done. And they hid it because the company, they knew about it because the company came out and didn't do the work. Well, you can choose which company you want to do it, right? But do you see how important that is that she disclosed all that?
Because it could have been
really bad.
it could have gone so sideways.
Yeah.
So as a perfect example of, you have to use like your brain as to what you should or should not disclose. And you kind of want to think of worst case scenario, right?
Right.
And unfortunately, I always say, not that this is going to happen, but if you really want to test what you're doing, pretend you're standing in front of a judge and defending what you've done and see what that looks like. And remember, they're not realtors, right? They don't look at it like we look at it.
Right.
They're usually pretty pro-consumer.
Right.
So if you're standing in front of a judge and you're saying, well, I did this or I didn't do that, I mean, how well is that gonna go over?
Right.
Or in front of a jury for that matter, because they can ask for a jury.
Because judges and juries are consumers.
Exactly. And if they've had a bad experience or they don't like realtors or for
Right.
whatever reason, I mean, you just don't know. It's gonna be subjective to that person. There's nothing laid out that says this is, you know, how it is. So
Err on the side of caution.
exactly, exactly. And that's what I always do. I think, okay, if I'm standing in front of a judge and I'm trying to defend myself, am I gonna be able to defend myself to show that I did everything I could to get the information to the buyer?
Right.
Okay. Now remember, it's not just adverse material defects, it's adverse material facts. So what is the difference between, you know, an adverse material fact and an adverse material defect? Right? In my opinion, you know, a defect is something that's currently happening, that you're
Right.
disclosing a current defect. An adverse material fact is something that I think, and this is just my opinion, that is subjective to what you think could be adverse to that buyer. And you
Right.
don't know what's adverse to that buyer,
Right.
right? If they have a serious health issues with mold or radon or whatever, that could be a serious, like, disclosure that they need.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not up to you really to determine it. So I say, look, what you just said, err on the side of caution,
Just cover your butt.
cover your butt, cover your ass, CYA,
Initial or signed, just that acknowledgement piece, right?
that they saw it, exactly. And the thing is, when you go to court, honestly, well, the one that I had that was my own, which I had nothing to do with, it was a structural issue. But even the seller's disclosure, they're like, that's not our signature, we didn't sign that,
I don't like shoes.
right? And like, we're gonna pay to get like a handwriting, you know,
Yeah.
whatever, but, so they conveniently forget half of it. Like Miranda's is so ridiculous to me because they have all the documents there disclosing everything. I don't see what the seller could have done to disclose any more than what they did. Okay, so you get to your objection, right? And it's time that you sit down with your buyer and you're gonna go through the inspections. Now, I'll just give you the way I did it. You do it how you wanna do it. I give you how I did it. It worked for me. I didn't get in trouble, so that's what I did. So I would tell the buyer, here's your inspections. You go through them. I want you to use the star system 1 to 3. 1 star is, not that big of a deal, loose door handle. 2 is, something I probably want to talk to you about. 3 is, I absolutely want this done, okay? Then I would do the same thing, and I would highlight everything, and I would go through the entire report. Now, everybody's reports are different, right? Be really careful about the inspection companies that you're using and what their reports look like, because a lot of them, they'll have a summary page, and the summary page doesn't include everything, right? Or some of them will just have like caution, or I don't know, some of them are really bizarre to me, but you want to make sure that it's a very thorough inspection with, you know, all the information in there. So then we would sit down together at that point. They've got theirs, I've got mine. And remember, I have every single thing in there that was noted that either could be an issue, is an issue, is a, you know, they'd say like, pay attention to this, it could become an issue or whatever. But everything in there highlight. So that when we sit down and go through it, we're going to discuss every single thing on there. It may not necessarily be something that we need to address in our objections, but I want to make sure that we're having the conversation about all the information in there. So then we sit down and we go through our 1 to 3 star, you know, rating, and we go through it. And one of the conversations that I always have with my buyers prior to even having inspections is, remember, we are not having inspections because we're gonna have every single thing on here repaired. That's not the idea behind an inspection. Every house is sold, what do I say? As is. So do not use the verbiage that this house is being sold as is. Every house is sold as is. Negotiating repairs is a bonus, right? It's like, okay, we're gonna ask for repairs and it's contingent on negotiating repairs, But a seller doesn't have to sell a house and do anything. Right? And, I hear people say, okay, the VA loan said that this had to be, or the appraiser said this had to be done, or the FHA appraiser said this has to be done, so the seller has to do it. No, that's not the case at all. That's just for the loan, right? That's for the loan. That has nothing to do with the home being sold as is. Now, in that situation where you do get an appraiser that says something has to be repaired and the seller says, I'm not gonna do it, the buyer can pay for those repairs and have them done prior to closing. You need to make sure that you write something that says the buyer understands if this does not close, they will not be compensated for the repairs that they paid for. Okay, but sometimes buyers, especially in markets like we've had over the last couple of years, buyers they're like, well, we'll do the repairs because we don't want to lose this house because we're never going to find another one, right? So just keep that in mind, and if that happens and you're confused, just give me a call and we'll work through it. So you get to your objections, and you write the report that you're objecting to, and then you're gonna add your section where you object, right? Now, something else that I see all the time is the cut and paste method, okay? You need to tell or specifically state what you are asking the seller to do, right? If it says there's a roof leak at the right or the southwest corner of the roof, and then I cut and paste, there's a roof leak at the southwest corner, right? I'm not specifically saying repair this and how I want to repair it, and who I want to repair it, and da, 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 da. So what I would typically do is I would cut and paste it, but then I would go back in and I would change it into, I would take what the problem was, but then I would change it into repair southwest corner roof by licensed roofing company, blah, 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 or something like that. So you can do it that way of just cutting and pasting and stating the things, but I really feel best practice is to state what you're actually asking for, because there are some things when you ask for them to be repaired, you have to specifically ask for what you want, how you want it repaired. If I put home has aluminum wiring,
All you're doing is objecting to the knowledge of the home having.
Exactly.
It's not asking.
What I do is, with that method, I'm gonna do the cut and paste, I'll put whatever is in the report, then I put solution. And this is what we want done.
Yeah.
So here's what it is, but here's our solution or request for repair,
perfect. And another thing that I always did, because I'm trying to, just be professional, but I would always lump everything together. So instead of going in the, like through the report, like 2.1, 2.2, you know what I mean? Because sometimes you'll have electrical at 2.1 and then you'll have some electrical at 9.4 or 9 or whatever, however they number it. So I would do electrical, and then I would put everything there, and I put the number in the report, and then I put all electrical in one section. Then I would go to, and I go to plumbing, and I put plumbing.
That's
And
what I
then-
do. Section it up, and then I put my solution of what.
Well, it dumbs it down from time. to
It
time.
dumbs it down, and why is it important to dumb it down?
Because people are dumb.
Well, besides that.
Well, clarity. It's, yeah, so it's not so confusing and all this legal attorney language, you need to be very clear so they understand exactly what you want, because if not, they can argue, well, I didn't understand. I thought you meant something else. Almost explain it like, well, I was gonna say elementary or, like middle school, a 10-year-old, something like that.
Were you gonna say something? Was somebody gonna say something? No, okay. It's important because of this. Let's say the listing broker misses something major. Because it's like, the way it's written, it's like just this whole thing, in some way or another, they miss something. It's a huge fix. You go to close, or you go to do your reinspection, and it wasn't repaired. What kind of can of worms does that open? You have to extend closing, buyer's interest rate's gonna expire, buyer needs to move, buyer is gonna be homeless, buyer this, buyer, right? So you may be dumbing it down for the other broker, but you're really doing it for your buyer because you wanna make sure that like it's very
Exactly.
clear.
Yeah.
So you don't end up in that position where you're like, oh, Mr. Buyer, they didn't fix this, because at the end of the day, what happens, they have a bad taste in their mouth. They blame you, they blame the other broker, they blame realtors, right? So again, it's all about making sure you're doing your job to the best of your ability for everybody.
And if you have to argue your case, the more clear it is, the easier your arguments
Exactly.
one, and if it's
Yeah,
complicated.
And then the broker can't come back and be like, well, the way you wrote it, which doesn't hold water, right? It's like, I don't
No.
care how I wrote it,
But
but
it's still an argument that you might not have to be involved
Defend.
with, yeah.
yes, exactly. So be very cautious how you write that up. The other thing, you guys, is remember, when you go to a seller with a laundry list of repairs, loose door handle, it immediately is gonna piss the seller off. And they are going to be less likely to negotiate with you because they're irritated.
Especially on big ticket items that they probably would have.
Exactly.
Pissed them off 'cause you asked for a
Focus
black
on
one.
the things that are important.
Yeah.
When you're talking about, when I have like 1-star items, loose door handle, things like that, I say to my buyer, if you want to closing and get your handyman, this is probably gonna cost you $150. They might say, well, I don't have $150. Okay, well, I understand that, I get that, but look at where you're living now. How many little items are not working properly that you just live with? I'm not saying to take the house, just whatever, take it as it is, but I am saying if you really want to get any of these repairs done, because guess what the seller's gonna do? They're gonna pick all the low ticket items.
Exactly.
And then they're gonna come back, if you have 20 items, they're gonna come back with 10 of them that are all low ticket, low cost. And then all the stuff that's actually important, they're gonna eliminate, but they feel really good about themselves because they are doing 10 of them. But really, those 10 don't matter.
That's exactly right. You know how I know that? Because that's what I would. If you ask me for 50 things, I'm gonna pick the loose doorknob and all that just because I'm pissed.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna fix the, or replace the.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you need to have these conversations. One of the other things that is in the inspection section in Simply Back Agent is an inspection is not a repair list. And it's a great article to talk about how, just because you get all these inspections, it's for knowledge, to understand what you're buying and to be able to say, I don't want to buy this house if you're not going to do these repairs. Or if I do buy this house, I know what I'm getting into, right? So like I put offers in on houses where I don't even do inspections because I can pretty much walk through it myself and I know, okay, I'm getting it for this price. I don't care if it needs to replace, I don't care about it, whatever. Buyers don't know that kind of stuff, right? They need to understand what they're getting into because who's gonna get the phone call? So I got this one a week ago, they are been in the house 10 days or whatever, and there's a leak. And they call their broker. And it's like, welcome to home ownership. You can't say that to your buyer. That's what I typically want to say. Is welcome to home ownership. What do you think? Just because something breaks, what is there like a time frame, like 14 days the seller's responsible? There's no warranty, right? So that's why in our inspection disclosure, it says in there, things are going to go wrong, maybe right after closing. It's just the way it is. You can't go back on the seller. Now, if something's repaired and it's after closing, does that survive closing? It does, right? So if you look at I think it's like page 14 or 13, I can't remember, of the purchase agreement, there's survival of parts of the contract. So if you go and you get something re-inspected, it's fixed, and then you move in and it's not fixed, well, go back to them and say, that survives closing. That still has to be fixed and it's not working. Now, are you gonna be, is it gonna be an uphill battle? Yeah, it is, because the chances they're gonna do anything, but that's why it's so important to get your invoices, make sure it's licensed, they're licensed, right, all the different things. And I don't care if the other broker is the one who chose, like, let's say the roofer, and they end up being unlicensed. You need to make sure that they're licensed. That is your job to make sure that they are licensed. The other thing we just added into the inspection disclosure, which I think I've told most of you, is permits. It says in there, if you are worried about permits, you need to check on permits, right? But again, everything falls on them, right? We're always to blame. So after you do your objections, Mandisa?
Yeah, I had a question about earlier you had an example about if there's repairs that need to be done for financing, and then sometimes buyers will do that, because of the market. What if the buyer doesn't want to do the repairs and the seller doesn't want to do it? What are the next steps if it's contingent on the financing, the inspector or even, I know we're doing inspections, but an appraiser, somebody says, nope, this has to be done for the loan.
Same thing as anything. You're going to negotiate. If you can't come to a resolution, you're going to terminate. It's your only option. Or sometimes in certain situations, a buyer and seller may say, okay, let's go to a different mortgage company, we'll get a new appraisal, and before we get the appraisal, we're gonna have the roof all tidied up. And, so that it will pass the roofing inspection, or something like that. That's happened before. You just need to make sure that, the buyer and the seller are on the same page as to what they're doing, so it doesn't look like you're trying to mislead anybody. But I always, when I have a house that say has like a 20-year-old flat roof or a 50-year-old pitched shingle or something like that, as soon as somebody tells me that, I'm like, we gotta get a roofer out here. Because I can deal with that roof prior to a buyer coming into the transaction so much better than I can once a buyer gets involved. Because typically when a buyer gets involved, they're gonna want the whole roof replaced, right? If I tidy it up and make it all pretty and we get it all sealed and all is well, and we disclose that there were roof leaks, but we've had a whole overhaul on the roof and it cost me $1,000 as opposed to $20,000, right? I can deal with that. Now, again, it's gonna be your seller's option because they're gonna incur costs. So the seller's option is, do you run into a situation like yours, Mandisa, where, okay, we've got a huge roof issue and now we're stuck because we can't close because of the financing, or do we head it off prior to that? And if we have to put a little money out, but hopefully we can get it through. I mean, it's still iffy. And those are the conversations you need to be having with your clients, right? You guys be really careful with how you talk to your clients about one of the art of what we do is how you have conversations with people, how you address it. The last thing you want to do is call somebody up and be like, the roof is shot, you're gonna have to get a new roof. Or it has aluminum wiring, they're gonna want all new wiring, or I don't know. What you wanna do is you wanna be the problem solver. So before you just put that out there and the seller hits the roof and freaks out, you wanna come to them with a solution, right? So the last thing you ever wanna do is come to somebody and give them information. So when you get the objection and you go to your seller, right? Have solutions ready when you have those conversations. Okay, the roof, they're saying is shot. It has to be, repaired for financing. Well, I've got an idea of where we can start. Let's get a licensed roofer out here. Let's see what they say. Let's see if the licensed roofer thinks, okay, we can patch this up and get this pretty for this amount of money. Cool. Call the appraiser, say, Mr. Appraiser, or call the lender, Mr. Lender, whether it's the underwriter or the originator, or whoever you're talking to. Here's what the roofer said. If we do this, will the appraiser pass it? Right? Come with some solutions and tell your seller that may not work, but that's where we're going to start. That's what we're going to try to accomplish. Or anything that comes up that's like, oh, that they don't understand, that they think, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. Come to them. The solution may not work, but if you have a plan, they're going to be so much calmer. Right? Coach them through it. And you would think in the way it actually used to be was you would go to a seller and go, hey, this is screwed. This is what they want. Figure it out. That's the way it used to be. Now we have to be the problem solvers for everything, right? So because of this culture that we have created, in my opinion, of we do everything, you need to go to them with information or with a solution or a plan or something that you're going to do, okay? Because they will absolutely lose their mind when they see these lists. And I do feel there are going to be buyers who are going to ask for every single thing, and that's what they want, and you are stuck, right? You need to go to that listing broker because you want the listing broker to respect what you're doing and say, look, I want you to know, I know a lot of this stuff is pretty chintzy, and, I worked really hard to coach my buyer. They wanted me, no matter what I said, they wanted me to put all this on here. Please take it to your seller, see what they're willing to do and bring it back. But the idea is that you want the other broker to, again, it's all about massaging every situation. You don't want to just send over this 30-item repair list to a listing broker, because then they just think you're an idiot. Yeah. And they're like, why wouldn't they coach their, buyer to, not ask for all this? Or, we had one the other day where this very veteran broker she got an offer and it was a mess. There was stuff written in, there was stuff missing. And so she went back to that broker and said, I'm just trying to understand like what is going on here. And she was asking questions and she says to this veteran broker, she goes, you must be new. This is how I've always done it. Well, this broker's been doing it for this other broker, we found out had been in business 2 years. So, right, so it was like, not that you guys would ever act like that, but you want to show them that you are doing your job, so that when they come back to you, because they'll get irritated at you too. They'll be like, what the hell, as a listing broker, you're like, this is ridiculous. Go back and explain to them, I get it, I understand, this is what they want, see what you can do. Then when they call you up and they go, well, yeah, it didn't go over very well, though. Yeah, I probably figured it would. What did they come back with? And then you've got this rapport between you and the other broker, and you guys are working together and not against each other. Okay. So I always like to say, strategize, massage, like that's our job, is to bring it to whatever party you're talking to in a very strategic way. And it's to how what you're trying to accomplish. And that's everyday life, right? Like my kids, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to play a game here. Like, hey, blah, 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 and they're like, what do you think about that? You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of how it is.
Well, then knowing the market too, because we sold our Fort Hills house during the pandemic, and hours later, we were negotiating, and they wanted almost 30 things. Like, part of it was the VA loan, but and we knew the market. We're not doing any of it.
Yeah.
We'll give you $1,000. It totaled almost $30,000 worth of repairs. Like, some of it's we'll just go to the next buyer.
Yeah.
So we sold it doing nothing, just give them $1,000. And then I've been on the end where we made an offer on a house, and our realtor said, they're probably not going to accept this. So that's fine. We don't need the house. So we want all of this done knowing they'll probably say no because of the market, and they'll find someone else, and we were okay with that. So,
well, that's a really great point, because you never want to go to your buyer or your seller and be like, they're not gonna go for this or this or that, or because how many times have you said, or not said it, but you thought in your head, oh gosh, this is gonna tank the deal.
Yeah.
It doesn't tank it, and you're like, how did I say that?
right. Yeah, and he said it, right? We're like, just present it anyway.
Exactly, that's your job. And if they ask you your opinion, you give it to them, or you might say, I'm a little bit concerned how they might respond to this, but we'll go ahead and put it in and we'll see what they do, right? Again, it's all how you present it. I mean, I am, if people saw me when I was negotiating something, you're like, you are one of a kind, because you're just sitting there bullshitting with them, and you're massaging the situation, and it's not how you would be typically everyday type of stuff. Okay, so there was something else I was gonna do. Oh, when your seller, or if your seller gets a list like that and they freak out, stop them and say, hey, look, they're just trying, it's business, don't
Get
take
as
it
much as you can.
personally. Your house is great, but let me tell you what, there's not one house out there that probably doesn't have most of the stuff going on. I mean, we've got a couple of big ticket things here that we need to probably address. For the most part, every house has all kinds of little things. Doesn't mean you're living in a crappy house. The inspector's job is to point out all of this, because one, if they don't, they're gonna be on the line. Two, the buyers just needs to know what they're buying, right? And I always tell them, if somebody came into my house, all kinds of little things that they would come out with. I mean, it's but they don't bother me. I'm fine with it. I have a beautiful home, but yeah, I know that there's crap all over the place.
That's the reality.
Yeah, it's a
We
house.
all live with stuff that's not gonna bother us, so why is it gonna bother us on a purchase
Right.
until a deal?
But
if we live with
people
it
start
every
digging
day?
their heels in
Exactly.
because they get pissed off. Okay, so now you've done your objection. Now you're the buyer, or you're the listing broker, you get it. Now what happens?
Listen, broker, to get the objections. You meet with your seller and say, here's what they want to do.
You meet with your seller. Now, another thing I would recommend you doing is, once you get that report, depending upon what's on there, you may want to start getting estimates.
Yeah.
And start figuring out the solutions as to what can be done. You may be under a time crunch. You may have 2 days to resolve this. So you may need to start making some phone calls to some licensed plumbers or roofers or whatever before you even have sat down and met with them. Because what's the worst thing that happens? You just cancel the appointment. If you go to them and you go, I've already got a roofer coming out, I've got a plumber who said it's gonna cost this much, you know, blah, blah, blah. That is going to ease that negotiation so much better than just coming to them with this laundry list, because they are gonna freak out. They can't even fix a squeaky doorknob or door, right? Much less 30 items. So you already need to be thinking of these things and coming with solutions once you get that, okay? And remember, again, you guys, the only items that you're gonna send over are the report that you're gonna send over is the stuff that you're objecting to. You're asking for a credit, you're not gonna send anything. Okay, sometimes people are strategic, they want a credit, but they also want to give all the things that are wrong with the house so that the seller has to disclose that to the next buyer. I think that's a
Wait,
little.
I'm confused. If you're asking for, if I ask for a credit, I show them all the things that are wrong. And so I'm not supposed to do that?
No, you're only supposed to show them the things that are wrong if you're asking for those items to be repaired.
I have a question about that. What if, because I know you're saying you don't want to frustrate people, but what if you're trying to sort of, can you use it as leverage? Like, you know, sort of talking like even offline with the other broker, like, hey, we found all these.
I can't hear you. Is that Mandisa?
Yeah, could you hear me? Can you hear me now?
No, I can hear you now.
Okay, can you use that as leverage, like offline with the other broker, you know, just saying, hey, heads up, we found a lot in the inspection that, you know, the buyer didn't like, but we talked about it and we're only going to ask for these two things.
Yes, you can absolutely say that. It's disclosing those specific items, because once you disclose those, then they have to disclose them. If you're asking for a credit, no, you do not disclose any of that. But strategically, people will do that.
Well, some sellers will say, well, you want a credit, what, I need to know what's.
And that's their, you know, I mean, they can do that, right?
Yeah,
They can say,
then
I
you
want
go
to
ahead
see
and
the
do that.
report.
The way we've done this before, as far as objections, that they would still have to disclose in the future. Sometimes if our buyers agree to it, because I like credits way better than repairs, just because it's easier. You say these are the items of concern, we would like these repaired by a licensed professional contractor, whatever. Or the buyers are willing to take a credit for this amount in lieu of the repairs being done, so they can do it themselves. It's like a slash. I don't know if
I think
okay
that's
or-
fine. There are people
They
that
would self-dispose.
do not agree with that at all, and they have their very strong opinions, and I've heard that.
Well, I just think it
That sounds
dampers, it
good.
dampers
I
the claims a little bit.
don't see it as a
You're
problem.
giving them a choice,
Yeah.
so I feel like it's like a little more comfortable. like-
What's important, and one thing that does work well with these documents in situations like that, is your responses are not part of the contract. It's not an agreement. So when you're giving them
So,
two options,
conversation.
then they say, we'll take option 2.
Right,
Then you put
then
that
write
in the
it up
resolution.
in the resolution. Right.
Exactly, which
So
doesn't go
don't
to the
put it
lender.
on the objection report, put it as a conversation in writing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or
Exactly.
can you just do it verbally and tell the realtor, we got a list of repairs, that are willing to take a credit, would you rather just me give you a.
You
we'll take
could.
a credit, or do you want the list of?
I think, well, okay, what I would do in that situation is I would say exactly that. Do you want us to just come back with a, what the credit is, or do you want us to go ahead and, you know, itemize? Now, but I think when you itemize it and they see all the items, that might work better, and that they're like, oh, you know, we're
Yeah,
gonna give
let's
them
just give
credit.
them money.
Right. But if they don't know anything, they might be like, why am I?
They might, well, exactly, because if someone did that, again, me thinking as a consumer, then that's why we've done it both ways
Right.
at the same time before, because I'm gonna say,
I
oh,
think
you want a
it's fine.
$10,000 credit for a laundry list of things that you say are on there, but you're not gonna show me, so you don't have to dispose of it. I wanna see it. I wanna actually see, because I'm not gonna believe you.
No, I would probably want to see it, and I would
Mm-hmm.
be fine as a seller disclosing information to buyer. Matter of fact, the fact that sellers don't want to see stuff is weird to me.
It is, because
It makes me feel very
it's almost like
slimy.
if this thing tanks, we're gonna go through this all over again, let's know. I
Just
wanna
know
know
what
what
to-
we need to fix, so we can
Well, and the
address
other
it.
thing is, let's say you do go to court, and then you do know stuff that you didn't.
Exactly.
I mean, you don't know it, but you know
But you know
there
there's
was
something.
there was some big ticket.
And then you
I
go
don't
in
know.
there.
I don't like
I
it.
don't know, I don't like
I'm pretty ethical in that sense, where I'm all about
disclosure,
transparency. Yeah.
just Tell them,
That's
yeah,
just me.
why try to be this, and we're not used car salesmen.
So why does, okay, so now you've got your responses and it's one, how do I say this? You've got a document that you use multiple times, right? So in years past, they have had different forms where it was like, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, right? And like addendum, well, kind of like addendum 1, addendum 2, but there was things in the past, I can't remember for sure, but there was like, they had like, one was for the seller, one was for the buyer, one was for, you know what I mean? In this case, they thought that's silly.
Right.
Let's just have one document and it's just your response,
Yeah.
right? So it's really, take the fact out that an addendum becomes part of the contract, but you know, you have addendum 1, 2, 3, 4, right, It's the same thing with responses. It's the same addendum, it's just 1, 2, 3, right? The response is the same thing, same form number, right? But you got 1, 2, and you can do whatever you want with them, you can number them, you can, just don't put addendum on them, and you can do whatever you want to keep track of them, okay? So then, the seller comes back, they can respond with whatever they want, the buyer, and so then you go back and forth and back and forth. Now, why is it that only one party signs the response?
Isn't just acknowledging what you got for this.
Well,
No
the
objection.
person that's responding signs it. And the only reason they're signing it is to show that they signed this, this is what they're asking for. Nobody else wrote this, nobody else came up with this document. They're giving it to you, right? Why don't you want the seller to sign it? In my opinion, I am not an attorney, but in my opinion, having somebody sign this response could, in essence, in front of a court of law, be perceived as part of the contract. Okay? There,
Oh, right, because the contract is 2 parties acknowledging.
2 parties,
If
right?
only 1 party, then you don't have an.
I don't even want them to initial it,
Right,
but there are brokers out there that feel very strongly that it needs to be acknowledged. In my opinion, excuse my language, I don't give a rat's ass what you guys are putting in these responses. That doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is what we end up in the resolution. That's part of the contract. If somebody wants you to have somebody initial it to acknowledge that they saw it, whatever. And I don't think there's a harm or a foul in
and
that.
at the end of the day, though,
I think it's
you
extra
make
work.
sense, the resolution is what matters, the conversation doesn't matter.
And if you're keeping your documents, if you're keeping response 1, 2, 3, 4, right, and you're keeping them, you put them in your file, you've got them. You
And
can see
that's
who
only,
signed it.
correct me if I'm wrong, that's only to cover your own butt, is tracking that conversation, because it's not part of the resolution.
Now, I can say, there are people out there that have the thought of having it acknowledged is a good thing because, you want people to be able to be like, I saw that, right? Because again, you always think if I go in front of a judge, right? So I'm okay with initials. You make that decision what works for you in your professional career, okay? But the signing of it, I strongly say no. I do not think, it's like the tax levy, right? When you initial it, you don't have to sign it, you just initial it, because you're just acknowledging you saw it, right? So that's my 2 cents on
You're
that.
not acknowledging you agreed to it, they saw
And
it.
so when people ask you, they say, they want it signed, because I get this all the time, I would say to them, why do you want it signed? And they would say, probably I want to make sure that the seller saw it or the buyer saw it. Say, well, I don't necessarily agree with that because this is just a negotiation in writing. We're just going back and forth. It's not part of the contract. But I'll tell you what, I'll have them initial it to show that they saw it.
It's not like you're gonna have your client's initial text between 2 brokers in negotiations. That doesn't, so it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Really?
So that, I'm a brat when it comes to things like doing it the right way. And when I know the right way, I'm like, no, I'm not gonna do it.
Right.
But don't do that. I'm just only broken now.
Just initials, not signature.
Yes, so those responses are just to show the negotiation in writing, because going back to what you were saying, a lot of times when you see things in writing, it's gonna go a lot further than when you're just verbally negotiating it. And remember, you guys, we're not agents, so we can't negotiate stuff, so anything that you talk about verbally on behalf of your client does not stick. Right? And I have probably 3 of those going on right now where conversations were being had between 2 brokers on behalf of the buyer and the seller, and it's not gonna stick because even though it's in text, you can't negotiate for your client because we are not agents. We do not owe fiduciary duties. So I had a buyer, buyer's broker, lose $25,000 out of her pocket. I'm not kidding you, because it was through texting. And then when it came down to it, it didn't properly get written into the contract. And so when they went to close, you can't negotiate on the parties, even though it's in a text. So be cautious. So then once you've gone back and forth, then who writes, so once you come to an agreement, who writes up the final resolution? The
Buyer broker.
what?
Buyer broker.
No, the last person who wrote the last response.
Oh,
So if what you've agreed to is the last response, and that's the seller, then the seller's broker is gonna write up the resolution as to what they just agreed to on that response. They're just gonna take that response, move it to the resolution. Now, that's what it says in the document that's supposed to happen. I don't care who's fills it out.
I'm gonna say, 'cause a lot of times we just.
It doesn't really
leave
matter to
aside
me.
Just because we want it done now.
So don't
Wait.
have the excuse or come to me and be like, well, they were supposed to write it and they didn't do it in time. I don't care. Your job is to make sure it gets done.
In time, that's
In
why
time.
we just
Right.
usually, like,
So-
no matter what side.
So the person who wrote the last response is the one who's supposed to write it. I don't care who writes it, just make sure it's on the resolution and it's signed by the resolution deadline, okay? So now, let's say you get to the resolution deadline and you have not come to a resolution. What happens?
Well, don't you get on?
You get an automatic 2 days. Now, the 2 days is supposed to be for the buyer to remove their objections. So you go to form notice of buyer to withdraw unresolved objections, which is form 5144. The buyer has the opportunity now to do that, because before at 11:59 p.m., if the seller came back with their response and then the buyer didn't, they had 1 minute, well, not even a minute, if it was 11:58, because at midnight it's expired, right? It hits 12:00, done. So they come to them at 11:58 with the response, the buyer has 1 minute to respond back or to accept it, then it would terminate, right? So now they put this 2 days in there, so the buyer still has the opportunity to move forward if they choose to. Now, could you in essence continue to negotiate through those 2 days? Yeah, you can, as long as you meet that 2-day deadline. But the idea behind that extra 2 days is so the buyer can remove the objections and still move forward without just getting terminated. Basically, cut at the knees and you're done, because that happens or used to happen all the time. So now you have those 2 additional days. Now, if the buyer says, I'm going to withdraw part of them, not all of them, but I still want this other part done, right? Then you're gonna say, okay, I'm gonna use this form to remove this, but we still want this done. Just remember, you guys, the notice of buyer's unresolved objections, this is not part of the contract either. Okay, so you could in essence go back with another response and just say, buyer withdraws these objections, but still wants these done. And send that over to the seller and see if you can at least get those done.
But you still have that, you're still limited to that 2-day buffer.
You're still limited to that 2-day buffer, exactly. So, and if you don't come to a resolution or you don't withdraw, then it's gonna terminate at midnight on that night. So, remember, and this is the thing that people get so caught up in, these responses, and if it does not say addendum like this, withdraw of unresolved objections, this is just to have it in writing, to have conversations, to be like, okay, well, we're actually withdrawing it, even though we've been negotiating, we want to make it clear. No different than if you use the form that says we're waiving repairs, but we're not asking for repairs, right? It's just peace of mind. That's all it's coming down to. But don't get so caught up on these documents that are not part of the contract. It's a conversation, it's a dance. That's all you're doing, you're dancing. That's what I say. You're just dancing with this person, trying to figure out if you guys can come to some sort of agreement on these repairs, right? But again, All houses are as is. So unless you put in your counteroffer or whatever your document that is part of the contract that says, you know, I don't care if you put this home is sold as is, seller will not complete any repairs. However, buyer still has the right to complete inspections and terminate based on inspections or something like that. You have to put in there that the seller's not doing any repairs, right? Now, let's say that the buyer comes back and says, gets their inspections and says, I still want to ask for repairs. Can they do that? They can, but the seller's not obligated, right? Can the buyer still terminate? Yes. So it's really not that different. The only reason that you write in there that they're not going to do repairs is you're setting the tone, right? You're saying, just so you know, we're not doing any repairs. You can try all day long, but we're setting a tone here to let you know this house is actually being sold the way it sits right now, and we're not going to negotiate beyond that. Okay. So you have your notice of objection. And then you go to your, if you look at the flow sheet that I sent to you guys, so the flow sheet sort of shows the process of the entire ORR process, right? So you've got your objections, you've got your responses, you've got your withdrawal if necessary. Let me grab it this way, I know what I'm talking about, and then we'll be done, guys. So you've got, so on the left side, you've got buyers requesting repairs, you use your notice of buyer objections, then you move on to the responses, then the next response, so that's 5142. You continue going back and forth. Once you're done, then you move over to your resolution, which is 5143. But you can, so 5140 in the green at the top, that is if you are waiving inspections. Okay, if you're not asking for repairs, that's that form I created for you. Okay. The reason why that part is not part of the contract is it's just a notice to the seller. We're not asking for repairs. We just want you to know we want to move on. We want to put this beside us, right? It's not part of the contract. Waiving inspections is part of the contract. Okay, that is an addendum to the contract. Okay. And at any time, if things are not going well for the buyer as far as asking for repairs and they want to withdraw their objections, they can use form 5144. But again, that is not part of the contract. That is just basically stating we're done, we're putting the white flag up, we're not going to ask for these repairs. And it's just, again, a notice. It's just saying we're done. Okay. So again, the only documents here that actually become part of the contract are either going to be your 5140 and your 5143. Those are the only two documents for the inspections that become part of the contract. Okay. Any questions? I hope I.
What are the numbers of those forms again, Carrie? The 5143?
So it's 5140 and 5143. The rest are just conversations. Is somebody else going to ask a question? Now, I do want to point something out to you really quick. So if you look at the notice of buyer's withdrawal of unresolved objections, and you look at page 2, so this is form 5144, go to the back. What do you notice on the back of that form? There's only one signature. Whose is it? The buyer's. It's only the buyer's because the buyer's the one giving the information to the seller that they're withdrawing objections, right? Now, look on the first page and notice it has buyer and seller's initials. Why is that? Because you want the seller, you're just asking the seller to acknowledge that they received it, right? But the seller's not signing it because it's not part of the contract. It's the same thing with the responses. So that's why I'm saying if they want the initials from either party to see that they acknowledge it, I don't have a problem with that. But this is clear and concise, showing you why you don't have, Ashley specifically doesn't have everybody's signature on here because this is not part of the contract. but they're acknowledging that they got it. So the only two documents that you'll see both signatures is going to be 5140 and 5143. No, not 5140, yeah, 5140, sorry, that's waiver of inspections. So those are the only two that both parties would sign. Okay, any questions? All right,
Very good.
thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Carrie.
Hopefully that made sense.
Every time we do it,
What?
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
So much to learn.
It never ends.
It's always evolving too, isn't it?